June 18th, 1815. Near a small Belgian village called Waterloo, Napoleon Bonaparte prepared to fight the final battle of his life. For more than a decade, his armies had crossed Europe. They had marched through Italy, Egypt, Prussia, Austria, and the frozen roads of Russia. But this battle was different. Napoleon was no longer fighting to expand an empire. He was fighting to bring one back from the dead. Only months earlier, the rulers of Europe had gathered in Vienna, convinced that their greatest enemy was finished. Napoleon had been defeated, removed from the French throne, and exiled to the island of Elba. Then came the impossible news. Napoleon had escaped. He landed in France with only a small group of followers. Troops sent to arrest him changed sides. Town after town opened its gates. King Louis XVIII fled Paris, and Napoleon became emperor once more. His return would become known as the 100 Days. But Europe immediately formed a new coalition. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia promised to continue the war until Napoleon was removed forever. France was exhausted. Enemy armies were gathering. Napoleon understood that waiting meant defeat. His only chance was to attack first. After learning of Blücher's defeat, Wellington abandoned Quatre Bras and withdrew to a defensive position he already knew well. It was a low ridge at Mont-Saint-Jean, south of Waterloo. Wellington placed much of his infantry behind the crest, protecting it from French artillery. 3 fortified positions guarded the approaches: Hougomont on the right, La Haye-Sainte in the center, and Papelotte on the left. His plan was not to destroy Napoleon alone. It was to survive until the Prussians arrived. Napoleon followed, but the weather intervened. Heavy rain turned the roads and fields into mud. French cavalry struggled to move, artillery sank into the ground, and the pursuit slowed. During the night, Napoleon looked across the darkness at Wellington's campfires. The enemy had stopped. To Napoleon, this meant Wellington had finally accepted battle. On the morning of June 18th, he delayed his main assault while the ground dried. The decision allowed his cannons to operate more effectively, but it also gave Blücher more time. At approximately 11:30, the first French attack began against Hougomont. It was intended as a diversion. Instead, the struggle expanded, drawing in thousands of French soldiers without forcing Wellington to weaken his center. The clock was already moving against Napoleon. By early evening, the French finally captured La Haye-Sainte near Wellington's center. For a brief moment, victory appeared possible. French guns moved forward and opened fire at close range. Wellington's line was exhausted, damaged, and dangerously thin. But Napoleon could not concentrate everything against it. Blücher's troops were attacking near Plancenoit, threatening the French flank and rear. Napoleon had to send part of his reserve to stop them. One force was missing from the battlefield: Grouchy. He had followed the Prussian rear guard toward Wavre and won a battle there. But strategically, he was in the wrong place. Most of Blücher's army had already escaped him and was moving toward Waterloo. Napoleon now committed his final reserve: the Imperial Guard. These were the soldiers who had followed him through years of war. Their advance had often decided battles. Their confidence had become a symbol of Napoleon's power. As evening approached, the Guard climbed the ridge toward Wellington's center. Through smoke and artillery fire, they advanced. Then Allied infantry rose from behind the crest and fired at close range. The Guard attempted to continue, but its formations lost momentum. Under growing pressure, the attack stopped, and the Imperial Guard began to retreat. Across the battlefield, French soldiers saw what they had believed was impossible. The Guard was falling back. The sight shattered the army's morale. Wellington ordered a general advance. Prussian forces pressed from the east while the French line broke apart. Napoleon attempted to organize a retreat, and parts of the Guard continued protecting the roads south. But the battle, and the campaign, had been lost. Waterloo was not caused by one isolated mistake. The delayed pursuit after Ligny mattered. Grouchy's unclear mission mattered. Ney's unsupported cavalry attacks mattered. Wellington's defensive skill mattered. And Blücher's determination to reach the battlefield mattered. But behind every failure stood Napoleon's most dangerous assumption. He believed the Prussians were finished. He believed Wellington was alone. And he believed time belonged to him. In reality, every hour strengthened the Allies. Napoleon returned to Paris still hoping to continue the struggle. But fresh Austrian and Russian forces were approaching France, and the political support around him collapsed. On June 22nd, 4 days after Waterloo, he abdicated for the second time. His attempt to rebuild the empire was over. In July, Napoleon surrendered to the British. He hoped to travel to America, but instead, he was sent to the remote island of St. Helena, where he spent the rest of his life. For years, Europe had watched Napoleon return from disaster after disaster. Defeated armies could be rebuilt. Lost capitals could be retaken. Even exile had failed to contain him. But Waterloo was different. It was not merely the day Napoleon lost a battle. It was the day Europe stopped believing that he could ever return again. French cannons opened fire across the valley, but the wet earth absorbed much of their force, while Wellington's soldiers remained partly hidden behind the ridge. Then General d'Erlon's infantry advanced toward the Allied left. Large French formations climbed the slope under heavy fire. They came close to breaking through. But Wellington's line held. British heavy cavalry counterattacked and drove the French infantry back. The Allied horsemen then continued too far, became disorganized, and suffered heavily in the French response. Both armies had been shaken, but Napoleon's first great assault had failed. Early in the afternoon, unfamiliar troops appeared in the east. At first, the French hoped they belonged to Grouchy. They did not. They were Prussians. Napoleon was now trapped in a race. He had to break Wellington before Blücher could bring his full army onto the battlefield. French troops were diverted toward Plancenoit to protect the right flank. Every soldier sent there was a soldier Napoleon could not use against Wellington. Then Marshal Ney saw movement behind the Allied ridge and believed Wellington was retreating. He launched a massive cavalry attack, but the Allied infantry formed defensive squares. The French horsemen charged repeatedly, yet without enough infantry and artillery support, they could not break the formations. Attack after attack consumed Napoleon's cavalry reserve. Wellington was under enormous pressure, but he was still standing. The coalition possessed overwhelming strength, but its armies were separated, and they could not all reach France at the same time. In Belgium stood Napoleon's closest enemies. The Duke of Wellington commanded a British-led Allied army protecting Brussels. To the east stood the Prussian army of Marshal Blücher. Napoleon's plan was simple and brilliant. He would cross the border between them, prevent them from uniting, defeat the Prussians first, and then turn against Wellington. On June 15th, the French army advanced through Charleroi in 3 columns. Napoleon successfully placed himself between the 2 Allied commanders. The next day, 2 battles erupted. At Quatre Bras, Marshal Ney fought Wellington's forces for control of a vital crossroads. Farther east, Napoleon attacked Blücher at Ligny. The Prussian center broke. Blücher was defeated, and Napoleon had won what would become the final victory of his career. But the Prussian army escaped destruction. Napoleon ordered Marshal Grouchy to pursue it with approximately 33,000 men. The instructions were unclear, the pursuit began late, and French scouts lost contact with the main Prussian force. Napoleon believed Blücher was retreating away from Wellington. In reality, the Prussians moved toward Wavre, where they could still march to Wellington's aid. That misunderstanding would decide everything.